Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had fantastic lunch. You were able to meet other folks and share experiences. That's what we're trying to do here. Now, what we're going to do is a live Datadog On episode. I don't know if you know the series Datadog On. Basically, what we do is that we've been running this for about four years now. So we have a lot of topics. So we sit with two engineers who are working on building Datadog every day. And we talk about anything that they're building. Like we've covered, obviously, over the past years, we covered a lot of topics. We've covered things like programming languages, things that we are doing on Rust. We've done a lot of on Kubernetes. We're also doing a lot of data visualization as well. So we have a lot of topics, but we had never talk about how we manage Datadog On internally. And that makes this a very special episode, and that's why the name is a little bit meta. It's Datadog On Datadog. If you want to watch any of the previous episodes, this is also being recorded and live stream. You have the site there, so if you see something that is very interesting that you want to share with your colleagues, this one is going to be available very soon on our website. My name is Sara Pulido. I'm one of the co-organizers and co-hosts of this series. So if you want us to cover a topic that we haven't covered yet, or you want to revamp on an old topic and you want to see how we're updating, how we do things at Datadog, please reach out. I'm always happy to hear if people find this series interesting and what they want to hear us on how we do things at Datadog. The important people here are Angela and Kris. So Angela, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Ara. So my name is Angela Beteta. I joined Datadog a couple of years ago, 2.5, and I'm the engineer manager of the Core Observability team.
And Kris?
I'm Kris Kennaway. I'm a staff engineer here at Datadog. I've been here for about 3.5 years, and I work with Angela's team and some other observability teams internally.
Great. By the way, we are going to leave enough time at the very end for questions. So every single Datadog On episode, we try to make it as interactive as possible. We basically want to introduce a little bit of what we're doing, but the idea is to get your questions at the very end that you may have after seeing what we have prepared for you. And one of the things that we do on every single of these episodes is to talk a little bit about the scale that we run on, because some of the decisions that we make internally in our engineering teams are related to our scale. Some of them may fit better with what you do, some maybe not. But just to give you an idea, we have more than 29,000 customers. And obviously, we are an observability and security company, so we ingest a lot of telemetry from our customers, and that adds up to trillions of events that we need to ingest and process per day. And obviously, we use Datadog internally a lot, so we do a lot of dogfooding. And we have more than 2,000 people in our engineering organization using Datadog. So all those numbers, what it happens is that it makes us, Datadog internally, one of the largest Datadog customers. So we use Datadog very heavily every day. We have a very, again, dogfooding culture. We test everything that we go then to our customers. Has been released first to our internal organization. So we do test a lot. We do use all these features that then you use, have been being used by our engineering organization. We also have a very bottom-up company culture. We want teams to be empowered to make their own decisions that make sense for their teams. And we do this while growing the team a lot. And obviously, managing the Datadog organization for Datadog brings a lot of challenges. So, Angela, what some of those challenges?
Well, as one of the largest customers of Datadog, we find ourselves that often we push the limits of what the Datadog product can do. We also empower teams to make their own decisions about how they use Datadog internally, but that leads to uniformity and also duplication. And that sort of duplication in the way of working adds friction to work across teams as well. as Datadog scale grows, we have seen also an increase in the number of observability outages, which are caused by accidental changes.
When you talk about observability outages, what do you mean by that?
Well, one example can be when someone, without realizing, they change a global Datadog organization config as a log pipeline or some configuration in that org because they thought they were operating in a different organization.
Makes sense. And that's, I guess, when trying to bring all this bottom-up culture into something more organized is where your team comes into play. So what does Core Observability do?
Yeah, exactly. So this is the mission of the Core Observability team. We were chartered a couple of years ago to focus on Datadog Observability posture. So in short, the team mission is to maximize the value of using Datadog internally at Datadog. And as I said, we want to empower teams to do what they think they should be doing to cover their observability needs. But also, we want to protect our overall observability posture. We see ourselves as stewards and not gatekeepers of these processes. And this means that we have to get a balance of empowering them to do what they want and us implementing guardrails, to protect the security, the reliability, and the maintainability of the platform globally. In short, this is what we call the governance of the Datadog platform.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that, when we were preparing this episode, by the way, one of the things that I love about organizing this Datadog On series is that I get to learn a lot of how people are doing things at Datadog. So sit with those engineers for a month while we're preparing the episode is fantastic. And one of the things that I loved about this one is learning that the Core Observability team has these core strategies, like kind of North Stars that they think about when they're planning any work, like how does it fit in our core strategies? So Kris, can you go through some of those core strategies?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the work we end up doing is sort of large-scale change. We need to affect a change across the whole company, and that means hundreds of teams, thousands of engineers, as we've seen. And so over time, we've developed a number of strategies that have been effective in kind of incentivizing the outcomes we're looking to achieve across the company. And these are the techniques we found to work well at Datadog, given our particular company culture. But they've been powerful enough that we now frame our new work in these terms. We look for ways to use these as tools to solve the next problems that we want to tackle. And so one that I'm going to focus on today is something we call golden paths and guardrails. This is one of these techniques we found for sort of driving large-scale organizational change. And so there's three parts to this strategy. The first is to focus on the expectations that we are trying to set. What are the outcomes we want to achieve across the company? So it's really important to be clear about what those outcomes are as we sort of do the outreach to teams about the change we're trying to drive. We need to be able to measure where we are and are not meeting those outcomes today. And as we start reaching out to teams, we need to be clear on why the outcome is important. And for us, that means connecting it to shared values that we already have. So things like business outcomes we're trying to align on. And if we explain why we care about a problem, then it's much easier for others to understand why we're asking them to do particular things or change their actions. So this is especially effective if we can connect to values that teams already have. So for example, if we can show that they're going to reduce their toil while they're on call, or making it easier to manage the usage of Datadog. But we don't want to be prescriptive in how we tell people how to meet the outcomes. We want to let them make their own decisions about what's best for their own team, given their own local circumstances, their own priorities. So if we align on the goals we're trying to reach, but not sort of telling them how they must do that. And the second part is that having defined these expectations, we want to offer an easy way for teams to meet the outcomes we're looking for. And here we want to find something which is going to work for the majority of teams. Maybe not every team, but as many as we can. And this is what we call a golden path. So if we're really successful in making this easy, then teams will want to adopt what we give them anyway. Maybe not right away, but over some time scale, we'll see organic adoption of the solution. But if teams do have more complex needs, or if maybe they can't adopt yet, then we've given them the freedom to find their own way to achieve the outcomes and not use the prescribed method. So these golden paths typically look like answers to questions of the form, how do I do something with Datadog? So how do I create my team with Datadog? How do I manage my monitors? How do I understand my team's metric costs? That sort of thing. And the ideal scenario here is that we can avoid the need for users to even frame the question to themselves, because we just answer that, we meet that need without them ever even having to think about it. And this is where platforms become especially powerful, because the more we can build into platforms that teams are already adopting, or which they could choose to adopt with some initial effort, then we increase the number of these golden paths or sort of the outcomes we're trying to achieve. More and more of them get delivered out of the box. And so that in turn sets up kind of a virtuous cycle. We have more adoption of the platform because it becomes more attractive to users. And then for us looking to sort of expand our impact, we can achieve more leverage by building more of these golden paths into the platforms that developers are already using. And so we sort of build on each other. And then finally, we have the notion of guardrails. So we've defined clear expectations about what we want as outcomes from teams across Datadog. We've given them the autonomy in how they choose to meet those outcomes. And we've offered golden paths that makes it easy for most teams to meet the outcomes. And then the last part is to put in place mechanisms that enforce those expectations and to reinforce them using feedback loops. So some examples of this might be things like putting in place continuous integration tests that block the merging of pull requests if they aren't meeting some standards. We can build things like monitors that will detect a change has happened and then reactively notify the user that they need to go back and revisit something. And sometimes we can build automation that will autonomously repair conditions that have already happened. And we'll talk about some specific examples of these golden paths and guardrails later on.
Good. It's great that you mentioned platforms, because I think it's a very important thing in Datadog engineering. We have many teams building platforms for the rest of the engineering teams and product teams. We have actually a Datadog On episode if you want to check how it looks like on the caching platform that a team in Datadog built. So if you want to check that out. And it brings some of these things that observability baked in on that platform.
Yeah, so digging into a bit about the feedback loops. This has really been a powerful way of scaling our influence. We're a small team and we want to, we have large ambitions. And so the idea here is that we have a lot of projects that require us to sort of effect change across many teams or many services. And we don't want to do that individually one by one because that's not going to scale. And so we have these problems of the form where we want to sort of shift everyone from a bad state to a good state. And the way we try and do that is by building mechanisms that act locally and autonomously as decisions are made or as changes happen that provide kind of a continuous nudge in the right direction. So we're trying to drive convergence locally without us being involved in all those conversations. And so a lot of the things we think about here, like the convergence projects we're talking about, might be things like policy compliance. Maybe we want to look at enforcing tagging of services, or we want to, if you have a service definition that references a Slack channel, we want to enforce does the Slack channel exist so that we have some data quality, things like that. And so if we can detect via automation when changes are happening, we can then push back on changes that are undesirable. So we can maybe block the change, we can require manual approval, things like that. And as we build these feedback loops, there are two things that are really important here. One is to be timely in the feedback, which means that we want to provide that feedback as early as we can, and ideally before the change has even happened. But if we can't do that, then as soon as possible after. And we want to avoid things like if we wait too long, then the user has probably already moved on to their next project. And if we are trying to convince them to come back and fix something, we've got to overcome that barrier. We also need to make sure that the feedback is going to the right party. So the user who made the change, or if we can't identify the user, then the team that's responsible for remediating the problem. And so by bringing these things together, we build systems that set up the preconditions for success. We provide teams with simple ways to meet their observability needs. We ensure they stay within the guardrails we define. And we provide continuous feedback to self-correct the process if there are any deviations without our day-to-day involvement in that process.
Thank you. That's great. And you will see as we move into specific examples how these North Stars are baked on every solution that the Core Observability team built for the rest of the engineering. So one of the things that we saw this morning is that collaboration between customers and product. We've seen it on the cloud cost management and NetWest and how they work together to build a product. But Datadog, as a customer of Datadog, we also collaborate a lot with the Datadog product. Obviously, we even more because we are basically the same company. So Angela, can you tell us a little bit how we do that?
Yeah, so this is a superpower that the team has. So we can partner closely with the teams that are building the Datadog product. So when we find limitations or frictions in the way we are managing the internal observability, we can closely partner with the teams, the relevant teams, and agree on a roadmap to actually fix that issue. And not only for us, but also for our customers. So the great advantage here is that we can quickly explore options and prototype the solution. So for example, we can build a proof of concept that, if it works for us, then can be used to inform the design of the solution that is going to be shipped to the customers. And the ultimate goal here for the team, for our team, will be to also convert to that solution when it's available.
Great. And we are going to see some examples of things that started as a POC internally, and then it became a product. So let's see some of the, so we've seen a little bit the strategy of the team and how they work. So we are now going to give you some examples of things that they've done. And as you will see, they have the very same problems that all of you have. So during Q&A, don't hesitate to ask questions or even introduce new solutions that you found for the same problems, because again, we want to make this a conversation between everyone here. So let's start by talking about something that probably you all suffer, which is unclear service ownership. Angela, you want to take this one?
Yeah, thank you. So when we look at what we could work on, we try to always tie it back to real business problems. So when we first started as a team, we kept coming back to this problem of unclear ownership. So unclear ownership comes with some challenges. At the time, back in time when we were starting to work on this, there were a lot of production services with inconsistent tagging, which was a consequence of growth, right? Teams split, they are renamed, and then the workloads, they remain with ownership attribution that doesn't represent the right team anymore. So this led to ineffective communication, ineffective collaboration, and ineffective coordination, because it added a waste of time and also added friction for teams, between teams to work together and increase the time to resolution. Even for the services that were correctly tagged, it was very difficult to understand what they did and how to reach to the owners. And these two things are particularly important for two use cases. One, as incident responder, in an incident, often happens that the first responder is not the actual owner of the service. So how they were going to find, the information about paging the owner team. And the second use case is when there are like large-scale programs where many services have to change. And that was very difficult to do the outreach to these teams. It was manual and time-consuming. So this was a problem that we set out to solve. So in 2021, there was an internal software catalog, the first version of it, which was co-developed by a previous iteration of the Core Observability team in partnership with another engineering team. A year later, we started to partner with the newly formed software catalog product team. And at that point, the Core Observability team transitioned to be a customer of the product. Since then, our involvement has introduced like new requirements which have evolved the product to the actual offering. I'm going to mention two of them that for us were very important. One is ability to represent multiple owners of a service, and the other one was having a way to group multiple services within an entity, a bigger entity, like a system or an application, and taking also advantage of deduplicating some of the metadata assigned to all of them. First of all, before even onboarding in the software catalog, we had to find a way to represent ownership, right? Having an accurate way of representing this ownership attribution is foundational to many of the observability and governance problems. So here, internally, the source of truth in Datadog for teams and memberships is a platform that is used by the human resources team, which in our case is Workday. So what the team did was to build automation. They built a system that keeps in sync Workday teams and memberships with Datadog teams and memberships. So this happens in a sort of dynamic way. So team memberships are updated as soon as someone gets in or out of a team. And this is exactly what we needed to start using Datadog teams as the entity that represents that ownership attribution internally. Then we wanted to move on how we were going to onboard, these services in the software catalog. And again, we provided a golden path in the form of a detection layer that actually looked at mislabeled workloads running in production and proposed in the form of a pull request service definition with minimal metadata. Minimal metadata as the service name and the team name to start with. So then owners, they had just to go and review and approve that pull request to start getting services onboarded in the catalog. Once we had the golden path, we then moved to implement some of the guardrails to enforce the expectations. So here we are going to differentiate between these two phases. The first one is when in the catalog we had less than the 95% of the total number of services in production. And at that point, CI checks and notification to teams were key to ensure valid metadata. So what we did was implementing some CI checks that prevented service definitions to be committed to the catalog with invalid metadata. When I'm talking here about invalid metadata, it can be teams that doesn't exist anymore, or they are empty, or contact channels that doesn't exist anymore, but they existed before. And we also implemented automation that frequently checked all the service definitions in the catalog to look for stale data, for steal metadata and notified this owner back to take action. On the second phase, when we reached the 95% of adoption, we then moved to enforce, valid team and service metadata by blocking deployments in staging and production. In fact, it wasn't a pure blocking of the deployments. In our case, what we are doing is that if deployments doesn't have a valid service or team tag, engineers have to manually approve the deployment. But in our case, it was a good compromise. So once we had built out the coverage of the software catalog, there were other teams that thought about using it or built up on top of it to solve their own problems. So this is the example of the production practices team, which is using the software catalog and scorecards as a way to distribute and evaluate rules. And these rules, what are doing is giving guidelines about production and observability best practices to the service owners from the very beginning of the software lifecycle. Another example is the runtime integration team, which is the owner of the automated software delivery process that engineers use internally to release a change set from code up to production. So they are also relying on the service definition to specify the CI/CD configuration.
Cool. One of the things while you were speaking that I was thinking and that I loved is that how your team, again, thinking about being stewards and not just forcing everything. It's like how step by step you improve the overall situation. First, maybe is your team that creates the PR to fix things. Yeah. Then you start with the CI loops to start bring awareness for those teams who already have that in that code, and finally doing a little bit more like blocking deployments and having to manually approve them. So it's great to see that you don't start by blocking everything and trying to bring everyone on board, but just moving things to a better stage. Okay, so that was service ownership. I know this one is going to be also very popular because I know this is something that every user, Datadog user, cares about, which is potential wasted metric costs. And the idea is how to make sure that everything that it's being ingested in Datadog actually has any value for your company. So Kris, do you want to take on this one?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that was made possible by fixing the service tagging, as Angela was just describing, is that also greatly improved the quality of tagging of the service telemetry, so things like metrics, logs, etc. And so a couple of years ago, we started looking at Datadog's internal telemetry usage to see what we could find. And so when we started looking at our usage of custom metrics in particular, we found two things that were really interesting. The first was this rapid growth in the total volume of custom metrics, which is shown here on the graph. And this is potentially a concern, but it's actually hard to say for sure, because a lot of these metrics are actually valuable. They might be really important for troubleshooting. They might provide important business insights. And Datadog has also been strongly growing over this time period. So it's hard to say, maybe this is a problem, but it's hard to know. But what was more concerning is that when we dug into the details here, we found that about 40% of these metrics were never even used. So they weren't referenced in any monitors, any dashboards, any SLOs, and so on. And so that told us we almost certainly weren't getting any value for these metrics. We were paying the cost, but we weren't getting any value. And so that's the problem we decided to focus on, was the wasted metrics, the unused ones. In order to get traction on that, we collaborated with an internal data visualization team at Datadog. And we built dashboards that show a hierarchical view of the custom metric, the wasted custom metric use. And what turned out to be really helpful here was to hierarchically group by metric prefix. So dd.something.something. And you can see here on the graph that this top right-hand quadrant, there are many, many small metrics that all have a common prefix. And this indicates, well, these are probably coming from the same place in the code. and these contributed to a large amount of the total unused costs. So we started reaching out to teams when we spotted these patterns, and we did this usually in the form of sending a pull request that would propose to remove the metric that we could see was unused. And we did this by providing, when we did this, we provided context as well, like what are we doing, how can you understand, how can you verify for yourself these are not being used, what is the cost? And we found this was usually a very easy conversation to have with folks because it was a sort of obvious decision for them to make that they could see this was costing us a certain amount of money, they could see it wasn't being used, and they could easily approve the usually one-line change to remove the metric. And so we could get traction pretty well on a one-to-one basis here. And as we reached out to teams, we were really making an impact on the numbers. But we found that it wasn't self-sustaining. So as we sort of shifted focus and started to work on other projects, even though we had done a lot like providing documentation and dashboards and tooling for teams to self-identify and self-manage their unused metrics, the problem came back essentially with the same magnitude once we sort of took our eye off that. And the reason was because we didn't have that feedback loop in place. It relied until then on our active involvement in the process to drive change. So that's what we needed to build. We needed to build a feedback loop that would carry on that work without us being involved in the conversations. And so we built a monitor which notifies any team at Datadog if they have a large and significant increase in their metric costs. And the message here isn't like, hey, control your costs. It's think about the value of this metric. Is it providing value for the money that we're spending on those metrics? And so we found that this was actually an effective way of sort of bringing that awareness to teams about the problem and getting them to think about that. And as we did that outreach, we found that was, in fact, enough to make an impact on the problem. And we got the numbers down from 40% to about 5% of metrics that weren't used. And this has been stable over the past year or so without us really needing to pay a lot of attention on an ongoing basis. So the alerting was critical here for providing that feedback loop when we had cost increases and giving teams the context of the cost and the value that they were getting. But we also saw that that we were had this shift in sort of mindset of how developers thought about metrics as part of their development process, and we sort of shift in the thinking to consider the value as well as the cost of the metrics. So during this work, we partnered closely with the metrics product team internally, because they were also very interested in providing tools to customers, to you folks, to better understand custom metric usage. And so over the past year or so, you might have seen Datadog has launched a number of features that are actually helpful here. So for example, you can, in the metric summary page, you can see, you can filter by metrics that are actively queried, meaning, for example, if they're on a dashboard, has anyone looked at the dashboard in the past 30 days? You can also filter by which metrics are not used at all, as we were doing, or which ones are actually referenced. And you can also see exactly which dashboards and monitors and so on are referencing particular metrics. And so, yeah, these are also available via APIs, so the kinds of tooling that we build internally is also possible to build externally as well.
Cool. And I think this ties very well with what Natasha was telling us this morning of connecting the dots. Once you give engineers the visibility and the tooling to help them understand what they're doing, they actually try to do the right thing. Is really about having that visibility, having that opportunity to do the right things. Great. So next thing that your team worked on was a problem that we had because of a history. Yeah, at the very end, we are going to give time for questions. So please keep them on your back of your mind, and we will have plenty of time. So one is widespread admin privileges, because Datadog has been around for more than 10 years now, and we've been using Datadog from the very beginning. So can you, Angela, can you tell us a little bit about this problem and why it came to be?
Yeah, so this is legacy from Datadog's startup time. At that point, we were a small company, and having admin permission is what let us move, quickly and fast. But with our current scale, that is no longer the case. We've also seen that having those broad permissions was leading to observability problems. I earlier mentioned, that accidentally you can make changes that break your observability posture, but also people might do it without even realizing because they have these broad permissions. So when we, like a couple of years ago, when we tackled this problem, the first thing that we did was building a system for anyone to get permissions in a sort of self-service manner. And I know this might sound contradictory because we were trying to remove permissions, not to add them, but actually it helps a lot to build up the confidence of engineers and users to understand that whenever they needed a permission, there was a way for them to get that. And it proved to be a quickly way for us to start getting down the number of admins to a sensible number. So to build this system, we actually based on an internal-only feature, which is this request role that never got out. But actually, these days, this thing can be done using App Builder. And this is something we are also thinking to migrate to as well. So the workflow here was that we created a set of permissions like this one. And then using this request role, we gave users a mechanism for them to request the permission, give information about the reason and their use case, and automatically within minutes, they will get that permission. This thing about adding, information on their use case was also quite important to us because then we could use that data to look at other sources of friction. We are going to talk later about another case that came from the analysis of this data.
Yes, the first time that I saw this thing, it was great because I needed to do something that I didn't have permissions, and I asked around, and they say, "Oh, you can actually auto-approve," and it was like great to see. So I was unblocking less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, we quickly realized that the case of needing elevated permissions was tied to a team more than to individuals. This is, a team needing a permission to do their job. In Datadog, permissions are granted by roles, and we previously built the Datadog Teams catalog because that was a prerequisite for the software catalog onboarding. So we basically glue these two things together and bring to teams a way for them to define a team role in Terraform as a collection of permissions that all the team members will need. And then we also build automation that grants these permissions to every individual in those teams and do it dynamically as soon as they get in or get out of the team. This is also bringing some other advantages. For example, this is in code, so you can track changes, and you can also bring extra information about your use case. And we can apply, the same configuration to multiple organizations.
Cool, thanks. The last one that we are going to cover quickly is. And I think this is something that probably you've also noticed. Sometimes people are using their user credentials for doing automation and all the problems that brings. Angela?
Yes, so from the data we collected on the auto-approve roles, we saw that one of the most common cases for asking for permissions was the provisioning of API and application keys. We also saw that there were some production incidents coming from automation running in production that stopped working because the automation was using application keys assigned to a user. And then when the user left the company, the service stopped working. And this pointed out like another source of friction, which was that users needed to provision credentials, but the system was like setting them up to do it wrongly. So to fix this problem, we have applied the same strategies that we've mentioned today. So first of all, we created a monitor that alert users when their application keys were used by automation in production, as to let them know that this was happening so they could take action. Then we also give them a golden path to create these application keys by a CLI. So the CLI is taking the full management of the provisioning of the application keys. And then what we did was to make these keys ephemeral. So we are rotating these keys within a few days, so they cannot be misused in automation. From this moment, we started to work on guardrails, as again notifying the creator of an application key if they did it through the UI, to also point them to the golden path of using the CLI. And then, we are like deleting all these keys on a sort of a schedule base to again, make them ephemeral.
Good. As you can see, a lot of solutions using the Datadog APIs to build new tooling on top. Great. So those were the examples that we were able to cover on this one. Obviously, their team have done a lot more. But I want to, before we go to Q&A, I want to bring those some takeaways. We've put some of them on the screen, but Kris, if you want to select one, what would be your takeaway for teams who are building the same type of tooling?
Yeah, so for me, one of the most important lessons from our work for the past few years is this idea that ownership is the foundation for observability. And so by taking a step back and really getting to grips with the ownership problem of who owns what, what's it for, how can we machine annotate that, we're then able to move a lot faster on our observability problems and have more impact in the work we were doing going forward.
Good. And Angela, what would be yours?
Yeah, I think that having called out the strategies that we use for solving most of our problems has been very important for us, because that is now built in the DNA of the team. So whenever there is a new problem, we actually go and face it, using these strategies that has proven to be successful. So, yeah.
Great. It's great to see that. That North Star on the team. So, so thank you. Now it's time for questions. We still have more than 15 minutes for questions. So I know there was someone who wanted to ask a question. If you can raise your hand, and Jason can give you the mic.
Hi.
Oh,
good. Just a question around custom metrics. So with your scale, obviously being one of the biggest Datadog customers yourselves, did you consider having custom metrics retention turned off by default rather than on by default? So you can have custom metrics ingestion on, ingests, but then doesn't retain by default. I work for a company, JP Morgan, and our volume creates significant risk around cost management when custom metrics retention is on by default. Mm-hmm. I've raised this with our account team, not had a response yet about default behavior. So I wanted to confirm from a product perspective and looking at this internally yourselves, have you considered that?
When we did this work, we weren't sort of strongly motivated by the cost per se. We didn't pursue sort of pure cost savings here. We were sort of more focused on making sure that the money we were spending on a metrics was money well spent. We also, I think, we do have a number of options like that to sort of play with the tag configurations or sort of cutting back on the indexing if and when we did want to pursue the cost angle.
Yep.
So just with respect to the sort of cost management and the golden paths sort of approach to developers, did you do anything in particular to make those things visible to the development teams or embed them into their own workflows?
Who wants to take this one?
So we've produced dashboards internally. So there are the alerting that I referenced, that points to dashboards that show on a per team basis, what are the costs of the team over time, linking to things like the metric summary page with tag filters, so you can sort of understand what exact metrics is the team producing and how do they contribute to the costs. That's sort of the approach we've taken there is sort of leading people towards dashboards. They've sort of, I think, become somewhat well known within the company of, this is where you go to check.
Hello. Hi. Very good presentation. Thanks very much. Quick question on the whole idea of cost versus usage. So did you do anything to, I think you alluded to it earlier, to address it's not that I don't want you to produce telemetry, I just want you to make sure that it's useful versus, you just want, like, for us, for any other company, it'd be, you just want a cost cut, and then there's a chance that I lose my observability posture. I think that's how you called it. So that's one question. And the second question, is did you find any metrics that weren't used, but they said, oh no, we want those because we might want them in the future?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the last one, though. There was a team, actually, that some of their metrics were in the report of end-use metrics, and they wanted to keep them because they were there in case of an incident, to quickly respond to that and give more insight on the actual impact of things. But they also understood that in this case, it was the cardinality of the metrics which increased the cost. They wanted to know if this thing could improved. So the team actually, worked with them, and we put some time in understanding the value that the metrics were given to see if there were a different type of telemetry that could be used to give them their level of confidence. And we did a full analysis that basically, resulted in some changes in the way they were managing their telemetry. So one of the things they consider were to stop using metrics for some of these data and move to logs, for example. But again, some of in some of these cases will need some, focus to understand what is the right solution there. And sorry, I forgot about the first question already.
Totally, if you can repeat it.
Yeah, I think we found that most teams would make the right decision if we just presented them with the context. And we're, I think, pretty careful not to say, look, hey, you're spending too much money, because that's not where we came from. It wasn't really our sort of authority to make that judgment. But really focusing on pulling out the value they were getting and letting them make the decision. And we found that, at least from my point of view, people seem to make a good choice. They either would say, yes, we don't need this, or we think we do need it, but maybe we can make some changes, or no, we definitely do need it because some reason. And then from my point of view, that's a good outcome. They thought about the problem and they've made a decision.
So it kind of feels like from support out-of-hours call-out workflow and a well-managed service catalog with ownership tags and all of this kind of stuff, that you can kind of manage the support workflow end to end, from someone getting called out, got out of bed, to remediating the issue, with one gap. And I'm just wondering either how you solve it, or if you have any plans to add a new feature, which is the documentation. Where does the documentation live? Can it live in Datadog?
I think one way to address that is to lean on things like the scorecard feature that Angela was showing, where we can at least highlight the importance of having that documentation and maybe provide some structure around how to even, where are you missing that, providing maybe some templating or some guidelines about how to do that. Do you have any?
Yeah, well, my thoughts here is as part of the service definition, something you can do is explicitly, put there a link to your documentation. If the documentation doesn't live in Datadog, in the form, let's say, of a notebook with your room book, for example, or with some team information, and it does live in a different platform, you could still, build some automation that actually, tells you if that is already exists or was deleted. But we are using that, service definition as a source of truth to provide all these important information to the users.
Yeah, it's good that you talk about, because I was going to add that I think notebooks in Datadog is a great way to have your own documentation with your telemetry at the same place. So obviously not everything can be a notebook in Datadog, but for things that really need to correlate telemetry with something like a runbook or how you manage a specific service, notebooks could be a very good solution, because it will also be updated in a timeline.
I think that's the sort of thing you could probably build as if you decided that this was important to improve the quality of your runbooks, for example. I could imagine doing a project where you build automation that will build, you survey your alerts and you figure out which ones are not linked to runbooks. You maybe analyze the quality of the runbooks. Do they have certain features, certain attributes, and sort of build a quality program around that, and then use some of the same kinds of tools we've been talking about to drive progress there.
Hello. Thanks for your insights. I really enjoyed a lot of them, particularly around golden paths and guardrails and how you affected change across the organization. 95% of people were gently convinced to move along through things like CI, CD. Can you tell me more about whether you had any challenges with the remaining 5%? How did they react to having their deployments blocked? Did you have to do anything to make that seem sweeter than it was, or did you get quite a lot of anger in response?
Well, we try to avoid anger, as much as possible here, right? In that particular problem, what we did was build in the solution a whitelist mechanism to accommodate these exceptional cases. So they didn't suffer, from the enforcement since the beginning. And then, what we do is keep working with these teams, to implement what they need as part of the solution. But that is, what we do as a golden path, not blocked, and have always a way to bypass if that is needed. I
think it came down to understanding why are they holding out? Do they have real legitimate reasons, in which case, like, we need to meet those needs, or they're just being a little bit, slow, or what is the reason behind it, and then digging into those cases. Yeah.
Where?
Hello. Just really interesting on some of the automation and guardrails and bits and pieces that you've built around the edge of Datadog. One, I guess, is there any plan to bring any of that sort of stuff into the platform itself? And two, do you have any sort of blog posts or general information on the bits and pieces that you've done that we could look at?
We were talking about blog posts earlier today. I think we need to follow up with some, I think it's a call to action for us to follow up with some more details here. For things like automation, the workflow product is really, really great for this now. You can do a lot of the same kinds of things we did sort of using bespoke tooling internally. You can build them within Datadog using the workflows product. There's enough, I think, inbuilt mechanisms that many of these simple cases, like, for example, the role auto approval, where you just want some basic user interaction and some decision flow, and then some API calls. And where that falls short, you can also, with more effort, call out to things like webhooks and do some more bespoke integrations that way. So yeah, I would definitely look at workflows as a mechanism for this.
In terms of to add to that, in terms of bringing like the community and share knowledge, we're very close to launch a preview of more or less where it's going to be a developer hub where anyone can share these small scripts, workflow automations, etc., with the rest of the community too. So stay tuned in because hopefully we will be able to share some of those soon.
We also, I think, we alluded to it, but we try and partner closely with product teams to not have as much bespoke stuff. Like, we don't like maintaining all these ad hoc things, internally, and it's much better if we can converge onto a product solution and turn it off. So some of the things around the permissions management, role management, we have like really strong collaborations with the teams internally, and our aim is to be able to do it through the product.
Yes. Yeah, we have time for one more.
You mentioned a couple times that reducing the cost wasn't the focus of like these initiatives, like because like Datadog paying for your own product is, I guess that's not like really big driver. So that made me wonder how different the product is Datadog if you're not focused on reducing cost, as it is like maybe like the way we're using it, where we are focused on reducing the cost. Like, is it like a totally different experience, or do you look at that convergence or divergence the way that you build the product?
I think we certainly do still have costs there. There still is infra that underpins all this. It wasn't sort of our team's mandate to focus on those. I'll say it that way. There are other teams that do focus on our internal cost usage. But we look at Datadog as really an opportunity for dogfooding. Like, we want to use as much of the product as we can, because that way we learn about how it works and how it doesn't work, and we can iterate and make it better. So I think there's a tendency to sort of use it as much as we can, and that brings its own challenges in some cases.
And I think it's actually two sides of the same coin. So basically, because if really brings value, so that's what the focus should be. So if it really brings value, it brings value. So it's worth the cost. If it doesn't, then that's where you have to save. So those are two things that you keep basically balancing out.
Yeah, for the metrics reduction thing, we also focus on volume as well, and then more volume means more money. So essentially, we were using the same sort of source of information here.
Cool. I think we're run out of time, but there will be around if you have any other questions during the networking session. Thanks everyone for joining. We have a last session in 15 minutes. It's an Ask an SRE. So again, plenty of opportunity now to ask questions for an SRE in Google and SRE at Datadog. So thanks again.
Thank you.